Okay, chapter 16 of the Old Willis Place. When Georgie and I awoke in the morning, the falling snow hung like gauze between the mouth of the cave and the ravine, blurring rocks and trees, earth and sky. The only sounds were the gurgle of the creek and the wind, now a soft murmur. Georgie peered out at the snow, at least a foot deep already, and laughed. "No school today!" It was a joke of long standing now, left from the time when we'd actually gone to school and celebrated days off. Nero sat at the cave's entrance, his displeasure evident. He looked at me as if to say, "What sort of bad joke is this?" "The little mousies are safe from you today," I told him. Nero twitched his tail and stalked to the back of the cave. There he snuggled in the blankets and watched the snow through slitted eyes. "Do you think the police will come in this weather?" Georgie asked me. The night before, I told him what I'd asked Lisa to do. I thought he'd be angry, but he'd listen calmly. "It's the first step," he tapped the side of his head. "I feel it here, like the rules." Now the two of us watched the snow fall, barefoot, bare-legged, Georgie, half naked, with feathers in his hair. Me with my long braid and Lisa's sweatshirt over Miss Lillian's flowered skirt. Neither of us knew what to expect next or how to prepare. Without saying a word, we left the cave and walked through the snow toward the house. We had to see the police come. We had to watch them go, too. We had to be sure. We met Lisa McDuff halfway down the driveway. She ran to us, her face pale despite the wind and snow. "I've been looking for you," she cried. "I was scared she might have gotten you last night." Lisa didn't need to say the name. We knew who she meant. "We heard her," I said. "She came close a few times." "Old witch," Georgie muttered. "She won't get us again." Lisa breathed a sigh of relief. "She caught me last night. She thought I was you, Diana." For once, Georgie looked at Lisa without sneering. "How did you get away?" he asked. Lisa shook her head. "I guess she wanted Diana, not me." "Whew, I bet you were scared," Georgie said, some of his old scorn returning. He actually said it more like this. "I bet you were scared." His scorn. "I was terrified," Lisa began crying. "Dad went to the house to look for the children's bodies, and I got scared and followed him. That's when she grabbed me. She was so horrible." I hugged her as if she were a little child, years younger than I was. "I told you she wouldn't hurt you," I whispered. "Did your father find the children's bodies?" Georgie asked. Lisa nodded. "Just where Diana said they'd be. He called the police. They're supposed to come today." She looked around doubtfully. "But with all this snow..." I drew in my breath and took Georgie's hand. There was no turning back now. Whatever I'd begun the day I met Lisa had to run its course. "I see them," Georgie pointed down the driveway. The three of us ducked behind a tree. Led by a police car, a hearse made its way slowly toward us. "It's the same one that took Miss Lillian away," Georgie said. "How do you know that?" Lisa asked. "Oh, all hearses look the same." I spoke quickly to keep Georgie from saying anything else. "That's what he means." Georgie frowned, but he didn't argue as I'd fear he might. Instead, he gave Lisa a sassy look, which she ignored. The two of them would never be friends. The police car passed us, its lights flashing. An officer in the passenger seat was drinking coffee from a paper cup. The other was intent on driving. Behind them, the hearse slipped and slid, but the driver managed to keep it on the driveway. "Where do you suppose they'll take us?" Georgie asked me. "The police aren't going to take you anywhere," Lisa said. "They've come for the children's bodies, not for you." Georgie drew closer to me. "You think you're so smart," he told Lisa scornfully, "but you don't know anything." "Shh," I warned him as softly as I could. The wind whipped Lisa's hair around her face, and she hunched her shoulders against the cold. From the looks of her, she was scared and cold, and very unhappy. The silence between us grew. We were alone in the trees. The police car and the hearse had vanished around a bend in the drive. Every now and then we could hear tires spin in the snow. Let's not fight anymore, Georgie, Lisa said. I'm sorry for all the dumb things I've said and done. Dad says I'm too prickly. I guess he's right. I looked at my brother. You're sort of prickly yourself, you know. So what if I am? He scooped up a handful of snow and hurled it at a tree. Splat. I could have thrown it at you, he told Lisa with a grin, but I didn't. Lisa smiled. It's good you didn't, she said. My dad taught me how to make a really hard snowball. Georgie touched my hand. Come on. With Macduff bounding ahead, we plodded on through the snow until the house was in sight. Georgie pulled me behind a huge oak. Lisa hid with us, pressed beside me. The hearse and the police car, its lights still flashing, were parked by the front steps. The tall double doors stood open. While Mr. Morrison talked with one of the police, the men from the hearse maneuvered a gurney up the rotting steps. Excited by the commotion, Macduff ran to Mr. Morrison. One of the policemen patted him. Are you going to watch them bring the bodies out? Lisa whispered. I had a feeling she wanted to leave. Georgie nodded, but I touched his arm. Let's go. Why? Because it's morbid to stay here and watch, I told him. Don't you want to make sure they find us? I glanced at Lisa, but she was edging away toward the warmth and safety of the trailer. She hadn't heard Georgie. Please, Georgie, I whispered. Watch what you say. Do you want Lisa to know everything? He shrugged. It doesn't matter anymore. Well, I'm going to the trailer with her, I said. Please come with us. Georgie didn't answer, nor did he move. His attention was fixed on the house's open doors and the darkness beyond. I left him there and ran after Lisa. Wait! Behind me, the policeman's voice droned on. He was saying something about ghosts, old mysteries, Miss Lillian's role in the children's disappearance. With every step I took, my back prickled. I was tempted to look over my shoulder, but whatever came out of that cellar was best not seen. From the high gray dome of the sky, a hawk dove toward the field not far from the drive. In a second, he was flying upward again, a mouse in his talons. Lisa glanced at the hawk and shuddered. I hate this, Farms. Hawks have to live, I said. It's not just the hawk and the mouse, Lisa said. That's just plain old nature. I mean ghosts and dead children and crazy people. Things that give me nightmares. I want to leave, like you. I followed her into the trailer. Do you want hot chocolate? She asked. No thanks. How about peanut butter cookies? She held out a plate. Dad and I made them this morning. Don't they smell delicious? I shook my head. Thanks, but I'm not hungry. Lisa sat down at the counter. I took a seat beside her. I guess your parents don't allow you to eat sweets, she said. That's right. I toyed with a pencil lying on the counter, spinning it idly this way and that. It was hard to think of anything but the cellar and what the men from the morgue were doing down there. Lisa fixed herself a cup of cocoa and ate a few cookies. I breathed in the aroma. It was almost as satisfying as actually eating and drinking. Let's play checkers, Lisa said. The board's all set up. I followed her to the sofa. The checkerboard laid on the coffee table, ready to go. Red or black? Lisa asked. Black. I picked up a checker and rolled it in my fingers. Maybe a game would take my mind away from the cellar. Lisa won easily. Not because she was a good player. I made sloppy moves. I overlooked traps. I let myself be cornered and captured. What's wrong, Diana? Lisa asked. Nothing. I gathered up my captured men and began setting up the board for another game. You're miles away, she insisted. I can tell by the way you're playing. I sat back and studied the checkers lined up on the board. So orderly, so perfect. Had the men put the bodies in the hearse? Was Georgie still watching? I shouldn't have left him there all by himself in the snow. I should have made him come with Lisa and me. It's the children in the cellar, isn't it? She asked. You're thinking about them. Lisa jiggled the board accidentally, and I nudged a checker back into position. Undiscouraged by my silence, Lisa moved closer to me. How did you keep it a secret so long? I sighed. There was no one to tell. Your parents. You could have told them. I wish to heaven I could have. I slid away from Lisa and gazed out the window across the room. Bare trees blew in the wind. Georgie was out there, small and thin, his hair full of leaves and feathers, watching, waiting. I can't believe your parents are as strict as you say. Lisa slumped on the couch and propped her feet on the coffee table, further disturbing the order of the checkerboard. Silently, I leaned forward and moved the pieces back to the center of their squares. Oh, Diana, Lisa sighed. Sometimes I feel like I don't know you at all. You don't, I said. She stared at me, speechless for once. Mr. Morrison chose that moment to open the door. Macduff followed him inside, wagging his tail, shaking snow off his fur. Lisa jumped to her feet, scattering the checkers in her haste. This time I ignored them. What did it matter anyway? Did they take the children away? She asked. Mr. Morrison blew his nose. They've made arrangements to bury them at Mount Holly. Do their parents know? Lisa asked. Mr. Morrison shook his head. It's such a sad situation. The children's parents are both dead. No uncles, no aunts, no living relatives. I got to my feet, my chest tight, my legs weak. They're dead? I asked. Mother and Daddy both? Lisa looked at me oddly, but I was too upset to wonder why. All I could think of was what her father had just said, his voice so calm, his manner so ordinary. That's what the police told me, he said. They're buried at Mount Holly. At least the children will be with them now. I covered my face with my hands. All this time I'd pictured Mother and Daddy alive somewhere, waiting for news of us. I hadn't considered the weeks, the months, the years as they'd rolled past. As Georgie had said, it was hard to keep track of time without birthdays and holidays. I felt a hand on my shoulder. Now, Diana, Mr. Morrison said softly. I don't blame you for crying, but it happened long ago. Try to think of it as a story you read in a book. You don't understand, I whispered. At that moment, I wanted him to put his arms around me as if I were his child, his daughter. I wanted him to comfort me, to stroke my hair. I wanted to tell him everything about Georgie and me, and Miss Lillian and the terrible thing that happened to us. I wanted him to know who those bodies belonged to. Instead, I shrugged his hand off and edged away from him, closer to the door, closer to escape. It's not a story, I said. It's true. Lisa eyed me solemnly, full of curiosity, but for once she had no questions. Of course it's true, Mr. Morrison said, beginning to sound uncomfortable. I was only trying... I know, I said. It's okay. I had reached the door. My hand was on the knob. I turned it. Don't leave, Diana, Mr. Morrison said. I'll fix you tea, hot chocolate. Dad, Lisa took her father by the arm. I think Diana wants to go home. With Macduff between them, Mr. Morrison and Lisa stood in the doorway and watched me leave. Find Georgie, Mr. Morrison called. Bring him back here. We can watch a video, eat supper. I make a great vegetarian chili. No, I said. I'm sorry, I can't. I turned my back on the open doorway and the warmth inside and ran across the field toward the woods. Okay, let's read chapter 17. I found Georgie in the cave with Nero, huddled under a pile of blankets, his dirty face tear-streaked. Georgie. I threw myself down beside him and held him tight. What did you see? What did you hear? He cuddled close to me, as much in need of comfort as I was. They came outside with the gurney, he whispered. They'd zipped our bodies, into black bags. Oh, Diana, the bags were so small. I guess all they found were... Shh. I covered his mouth with my hand. I told you not to watch. Georgie pushed my hand away. You have to hear this part, Diana. It's about Miss Lillian. I lay back, propped on my elbows, and let him go on. The police were talking, Georgie told me. One said it might have been an accident, but the other said the door was bolted from the outside. That meant someone had locked us in. He said, and who else could it have been but that crazy old woman? It's a shame nobody figured that out sooner, I said. Miss Lillian got away with killing us. She never went to jail. She was never punished. It's not fair, Georgie scowled. It's not fair, Diana. I pulled the covers up under my chin. The fading light of day shone through the cave's opening, barely illuminating the darkness around us. Did the police say anything else? I asked. Georgie shifted his position to see me better. Mother and Daddy are dead, he said in a low voice. But I'd guessed that already, hadn't you? I always hoped they'd come back for us someday, I told him. I guess that's silly, but, well, I wanted it to be true, so I pressed my lips together and tried not to cry. They're going to bury us with Mother and Daddy, Georgie said, as if to console me. We'll all be together, Diana. I wasn't consoled. I wanted to be with Mother and Daddy again, but not in a graveyard. I wanted them to be here on the farm, the way we were before the bad thing happened. Outside, twilight darkened into night. The wind blew harder, soughing in the treetops. Far away from the direction of the house came the faint sound of piano. Miss Lillian's favorite piece, the Moonlight Sauna, floated through the darkness, eerie, distorted, out of tune. I pictured her at the piano back in the days when its mahogany gleamed and every note was true. Her hands struck the keys. Her head moved to the music's rhythm. Her thin body swayed. I stood in the doorway, watching, hearing her mistakes, yearning to push her aside and play the piece properly. She looked up and saw me, her face twisted in anger, and she slammed the piano lid shut. "Get out," she would yell. "Get out." Pushing the memory away, I burrowed deeper under the covers, hoping to block the sound of the piano. Beside me, Georgie slept quietly, Lisa's bear clasped to his chest. Nero came closer, turning around once or twice and curled between us, purring as if he hoped to comfort us. But there was no comfort without Mother and Daddy. The next thing I knew, Georgie was shaking my shoulder. "Diana," he whispered, "something's outside the cave." I rose to my knees, listening for sounds in the darkness outside. I heard nothing, but Nero's back rose and his tail puffed to twice its normal size. The cave filled with his eerie growling song. "It's her," Georgie clutched my arm, his nails biting into my skin. "It's Miss Lillian." He crept to the cave's entrance and peered into the night. The wind shook shadows across the snow, confusing my eyes. Then I heard what Georgie had heard, a voice calling, rising and falling with the wind. She was in the woods, not far away, coming towards us. "Run," Georgie whispered. "Don't let her get us." I would have taken his hand, but he was clutching Alfie. The two of us darted out of the cave and slid down the snowy bank into the creek. She must not trap us again. Through the woods, across fields and streams, uphill and down, we ran and she followed, calling us again and again. Our names echoed from bare trees, bouncing back from the snow, became unrecognizable. Deer fled from the sounds of the chase, bounding through the snow in fright. A fox barked from a boulder and vanished into a thicket, fearful for his own safety. Georgie and I came out of the woods behind the house. It sat on the hill above us, a dark shape crouched against the moonlit sky, its crooked chimneys rising like broken fingers from the roof. We ran across the snowy lawn spiked with dead weeds. I looked back. She was behind us, running as only the dead can run, tirelessly, her white hair wild and loose in the wind, her gray dress fluttering. "Diana, Georgie," she cried, as if she knew no words other than our names. "Diana, Georgie." Not there, I grabbed Georgie's arm to steer him away from the house. He looked at me, glassy-eyed with fear, as if he didn't know where he was or what he was doing. Still holding his arm, I skirted the house and ran down the drive. The tracks of the police car and the hearse cast shadows in the snow. Like a ghost himself, the albino deer stood at the edge of the trees. He watched us for a moment and then vanished into the shadows. Behind us, Miss Lillian called, "Diana, Georgie, Diana, Georgie." On we ran. On she came. At the end of the driveway, we realized we could go no further. We come to the fence between us and the rest of the world. I yanked Georgie to the right, planning to run along the fence, but he slipped in the snow and fell by the gate, pulling me down with him. We scrambled to our feet, but we were too late. Miss Lillian had trapped us between the fence and a thicket of bushes and vines heaped with snow. She was close enough for us to see her clearly. She was old. She was ill. She was thinner than ever. She stretched her bony hand toward us and chanted our names. Diana and Georgie, I have you now. Don't try to escape. I've chased you more than enough. I thrust Georgie behind me. She mustn't get him. She mustn't hurt him. I'd protect him this time. What do you want? I cried. Haven't you done enough to us already? She lunged at me, seized my arm, and pulled me close. Her cold fingers pressed my skin, chilling me to the bone. You've given me no rest, no peace, not while I was alive, not after my death, and now, leave my sister alone. Still holding Alfie, Georgie tried to pull me away from Miss Lillian. You hurt us. You made a bad thing happen. You, she turned to Georgie, her face filled with fury. You were always the bad one, making faces at me behind your mother's back, teasing and tormenting me, stealing my things. Why, you have my bear right now. Give him to me. Georgie drew back and clutching Alfie. This is my bear, not yours. Lisa gave him to me. Let us go, I begged her. We can't harm you now. Oh no, Miss Lillian held us both, her grip too strong to break. I can't let you go, not yet. We have old accounts to settle, the three of us. Georgie and I clung to each other in dread. What accounts? Tweaking Miss Lillian's skirts, knocking pictures off the walls, breaking knickknacks, slamming doors, hiding her jewelry, taking her money. Small things compared to what she'd done to us. Just look at you, she said suddenly, hiding on my farm like fugitives, one of you dressed in my clothes and the other wearing almost nothing but feathers in his hair. Filthy, rude, stealing and lying. You're a disgrace to your parents, to my parents, to society itself. It's your fault we're here, Georgie cried. Miss Lillian stepped back as if he'd struck her. My fault? How dare you say such a thing? Nothing is my fault, nothing. Liar, Georgie retorted. You know what you did. What happened was your own fault, Miss Lillian went on. You deserve to be punished. Someone had to teach you a lesson. Your parents never raised a hand to you. They let you run wild, so the duty fell to me. Too angry now to be afraid, I thrust my face into hers, daring her to harm me. You chased us into the cellar and locked us in that room, and then you left us there. To teach you a lesson, she repeated it. That's all I meant to do. A lesson? I stared at her in disbelief. You killed us. She released us then and began fidgeting with the string of pearls around her neck. No, she whispered. It was an accident, an unfortunate accident. Surely you realize I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't mean to. Georgie brushed me aside and walked right up to Miss Lillian, storming with anger. You're a murderer, he shouted. You should have gone to jail. They should have executed you. I had a stroke, Miss Lillian shouted back. A stroke. You upset me. My blood pressure shot up. I collapsed at the top of the cellar steps. Your mother found me on the kitchen floor, unconscious. Your father called an ambulance. They put a tube down my throat. They put something over my mouth. How could I tell anyone where you were? I was more dead than alive. Miss Lillian smoothed her dress, touched her hair, wrung her hands nervously. I was in the hospital a long time, weeks, months. I can't be sure. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. It's a wonder I didn't die. She toyed with the pearls, sliding them between her fingers, one by one, as if she were counting them. She peered at Georgie and me, her eyes sharp. When I finally recovered, what happened in the cellar seemed like a dream, a nightmare, not something I'd really done. I stood in the snow, almost mesmerized by the soft click of the pearls, and tried to understand what I just heard. Miss Lillian hadn't meant to kill us. It was an accident. She'd had a stroke and gone to the hospital. While she was there, unable to speak, we died, Georgie and me. Why didn't you tell someone when you could talk? I asked her. Miss Lillian's hand strayed from her pearls to her hair and then to her dress, smoothing, twitching, tweaking, never still. What good would it have done? You were dead by then. Our parents, I began, but Miss Lillian interrupted, her voice shrill. I would have been arrested, me, Lillian Eleanor Willis, the daughter of Judge John Willis, the granddaughter of an attorney, the descendant of one of the oldest families in Maryland, Can you imagine the disgrace? She touched her hair again, smoothed her dress, opened and shut her mouth, grimacing with the effort of finding the right words. I lived to be almost 100 years, she went on slowly, close to tears now. Every year was more miserable than the one before. All I wanted was to die and be done with it, but 10 years after my death, I'm still here on this farm, as unhappy as ever. No rest, no peace. I've been punished long enough. I want to move on. It's time, past time. The old woman took a deep breath and looked toward the empty road beyond the gate, her face filled with longing. The moonlight fell on her gaunt face, darkening her eyes. Now you know the truth, she said. Don't stand there like ninnies. Speak up. Say what must be said, or... Her voice dwindled, and she began to fidget with her pearls again. Words crowded into my head. I knew what must be said, and I knew what must be done, but it wasn't easy. While Georgie stood there, hugging his bear, I forced myself to take Miss Lillian's hand and look into her eyes. Her hand twitched as if she intended to draw it away, so I held it tighter, pressing the bones in her fingers. We've been angry with you for a long time, I told her. Afraid of you too. But now I think we must forgive you, and you must forgive us. Georgie snorted in surprise. Why does she need to forgive us? What did we ever do to her that she didn't deserve? Everything's been her fault. Even before the bad thing, she was mean. Without releasing Miss Lillian, I grabbed one of Georgie's hand. Stop blaming her. She's old. Let it go. All of it. Everything. Clutching Alfie with his free hand, he tried to pull away, his face sulky. I squeezed his hand. If we don't forgive each other, I said, we'll all be here forever. It's the last rule, Georgie. Can't you feel it? Georgie didn't look at me or Miss Lillian, but his hand went limp in mine. I watched the anger leave his face. Cautiously, I placed his hand in Miss Lillian's. He didn't yank it away like Miss Lillian. He stood quietly. I'm sorry I locked you in the storeroom, Miss Lillian said to Georgie and me. It cost her a lot of effort to add, and before. I shouldn't have treated you the way I did, even though you... I'm sorry I teased you and took your things, I said, quickly before she ruined her apology. For a moment, Georgie didn't speak. He squeezed his hand again, worried he was about to doom us to an eternity at Oak Hill Manor. I'm sorry, too, he finally managed. But he didn't look at Miss Lillian. He held Alfie tightly, as if he expected the old woman to snatch the bear away. The farm was still. No owl hooted, no fox barked, no wind stirred the trees. Beyond the fence, the highway was deserted. Something was about to happen. We could sense it in the silence. Slowly, the moonlight brightened. It cast ink-black shadows across the brilliant snow. Half blinded, we drew closer together, unsure, a little afraid. Diana, Georgie whispered, look. He pointed at the road. 2 people walked slowly toward us, their faces indistinct, their forms shadowy despite the blinding light. Georgie pressed himself against me, and Miss Lillian held my hand tighter. Who are they? Georgie asked. What do they want? It's Mother, I whispered, and Daddy. They've come for us at last. Georgie and I broke away from Miss Lillian and shoved open the gate. We ran out into the road, free at last from the farm and its rules. Mother and Daddy hurried toward us, calling our names, eager to hold us once more. Georgie sprinted ahead. As he flung himself at Mother, I heard Miss Lillian cry, Don't leave me, take me with you. I came to a sudden stop halfway between the gate, and my parents and I looked back. The old woman stood at the edge of the light, her arms stretched out to Mother and Daddy. Please, she cried, please forgive me. Mother turned to Daddy, her eyes full of questions. When he hesitated, I ran to him. Don't leave her here, I begged. She didn't mean to. It was an accident. She's sorry. Mother looked at Daddy again. This time he nodded. Mother held out her hand. Come with us, Miss Lillian. I walked to the old woman. As I reached for her hand, I noticed Alfie sitting on the fence. I glanced at Georgie, but said nothing. It was clear he no longer needed the bear. Miss Lillian hobbled through the gate toward me. She looked back once, as though bidding Oak Manor farewell forever. Together, the five of us walked into the brilliance. It was as if we were entering the moon itself. And then this is from the Diary of Lisa Morrison. Dear Dee Dee, I will never see Diana or Georgie or Miss Willis again. They are gone forever. But before I tell you how I know that, I guess I should start with what Daddy told me after Diana left. Daddy fixed hot cocoa for me and coffee for himself. Then he put the plate of peanut butter cookies on the table and sat down across from me. The police told me the names of the children in the cellar, he said. Diana and Georgie Eldridge. Odd coincidence, those first names, don't you think? It made me shiver all over because I had the same thought I'd had before about Diana and Georgie. Only now I knew it was true. Diana and Georgie were the children in the cellar. The bodies in the storeroom were their bodies. Suddenly, everything about Diana made sense, and I could hardly believe I hadn't figured it out earlier. Which means ghosts are not all what I imagine them to be. Not transparent, not spooky, not phantoms of the night, but real and solid, with shadows and everything. Only they never get cold, and they can't eat or drink or hurt themselves. You could sit next to a ghost at a bus stop and never know it. You could be friends with one and not even suspect. That's what I think, at least. After Dad told me the children's name, I started crying. He tried to comfort me. You're too sensitive to deal with all that happens here, he said. Maybe we should move. Maybe I should find a different job. Go back to teaching, maybe. Would you like that? You could live in a neighborhood with other kids and have a more normal life. I stared at him, amazed. Do you really mean that? I asked. He said yes, he meant it. He'd been thinking about it for several days, and it seemed to him I needed more friends. He didn't want me to spend too much time alone. It's not good for me, he says, especially now, in light of all that's happened. So, he's going to start looking for a job and another place to live. I told him about the house for sale across the highway. He said he'd look into it, but it's probably too expensive. In the meantime, I can start school in Adelphi, which makes me very happy, even though the farm doesn't seem so scary now that Miss Willis is gone. But Dee Dee, that's not the end of my story. That night, Miss Willis began calling Diana and Georgie again. Even though I was afraid, I looked out the window. In the moonlight, I saw Diana and Georgie running across the field toward the driveway. Miss Willis was close behind. I pulled on my boots and parka and sneaked outside. Stumbling through the snow, I ran after them. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I wished I'd brought Macduff. Miss Willis caught Diana and Georgie by the gate. I didn't dare get too close, so I couldn't hear anyone but Miss Willis, who ranted and raved loudly enough to wake Dad. She blamed everything on Diana and Georgie. It was their fault they died in the cellar, not hers. How could she believe such a crazy thing? She locked them in. She left them there. She had excuses for everything, but what she did was wrong. She should have told Diana and Georgie's parents. She made them suffer even more because they never knew what happened to their children. Then an amazing thing happened, Dee Dee. Diana reached out and took Miss Willis's hand. She made Georgie take the other. He didn't want to. For once I was on his side. I would never have forgiven that horrible old woman. They all spoke in low voices. Oh, I wish I'd been brave enough to creep closer so I could have heard what they were saying. Suddenly, the moon began to shine brighter and brighter. It almost blinded me. I've never seen a moon like that. It was absolutely supernatural and terrifying, but beautiful too. I crouched in the shadows and waited to see what would happen next. The next thing I knew, Diana and Georgie ran out to the gate and into the road. I heard Georgie call his mother and father. Miss Willis stood by herself watching them go. Then she stretched out her arms and cried, "Don't leave me." Diana turned and looked back at Miss Willis. The moon shone right through her. She held her hand out to the old woman, the very person who had killed her and her brother. I ran toward Diana. I had to say goodbye. I had to tell her I'd never forget her, but before I reached the gate, she was gone, and so was Miss Willis. The moon dimmed and shone with an ordinary light, and I could see the highway stretching away, empty. Behind me, leading up to the gate, were 3 sets of footprints, 4 counting mine. On the other side, the police car and hearse had left their tracks, but not one footprint marked the snow on the road. And then I saw something on the gate. My bear, just sitting there as if he was waiting for me. Georgie must have left him for me. I picked up Tedward and rubbed my face against his soft fur. He smelled like Georgie, not quite clean, but not really dirty. I didn't know how long I stayed at the gate, shivering in the wind, staring at the empty road and the moon high up in the sky as bright as a new dime. Did I think they'd return if I waited long enough? No, they were gone for good, and they'd let Miss Willis go with them, even after the terrible thing she'd done. Finally, I got so cold I thought I'd freeze to death standing there by the gate. Feeling sad and lonely, I turned my back to the highway and started home. The wind made a racket in the treetops, but I didn't hear Miss Willis or her piano. No one watched me from the woods. The night was as ordinary as a winter night can be, and I was alone. Well, not quite alone. Halfway home, who did I see but Nero, making his way toward me, lifting each paw daintily and giving it a little shake. He meowed as if to say he'd been waiting for me a long time and he was cold and hungry. I picked him up. His purr rumbled against my chest, and I buried my face in his soft, sweet fur. Well, I said, I guess you're my cat now, so you might as well come home with me. When I tell Dad Diana's gone, not where or how, just that she moved like an ordinary girl, I know he'll let me keep Nero. I just hope Macduff won't mind. Surely he's used to the cat by now. Oh, Dee Dee, I wish I'd had a chance to say goodbye to Diana. Every time I see the full moon, I'll think of her and wonder where she is. Happy, I hope, with her family in some beautiful place beyond the moon. Maybe my mother is there too. I wonder if she'll come for me some moonlit night a long, long time from now. Love, Lisa. The end of The Old Willis Place.